So I've been looking over some of the M1X MacBook Pro leaks from a couple of months ago, and I discovered a goldmine of information that I somehow didn't properly understand until today. And based on what I just realized, Apple is gonna absolutely dominate the market starting this year, and especially going into 2022. Now, if you saw my recent video on how x86 is starting to die, you'll know that many of the largest PC makers, including Intel themselves, are beginning to follow in Apple's footsteps by ditching x86 chips and switching to ARM and RISC-based chips for laptops in an attempt to compete with Apple's MacBooks starting next year. But honestly, those other guys don't stand a chance, at least for the next couple of years, because Apple is going to be doing something that's absolutely genius and totally unique, something that the other guys can't copy. So before I get deep into how Apple's going to pull off their custom M1X chiplets to dominate the market, I want to explain the most important part of Apple's strategy that they've already started implementing with the very first M1 chip. Surprisingly, Apple's very first M1 Macs didn't go up in price compared to the previous Intel models, which is pretty impressive considering the massive differences in performance, efficiency, and reliability. So the question is, how did Apple pull it off? Well, the secret is mass manufacturing of the M1 chip, which allowed Apple to basically subsidize the cost of the actual Macs themselves. What I mean is that when Apple initially revealed the M1 chip alongside the M1 MacBook Air, the MacBook Pro, and the Mac Mini way back in November, Apple already knew that they were planning on tossing that M1 chip into not only the M1 iMac, but also the M1 iPad Pro. That's 5 of Apple's products that they knew will be selling in huge volumes for the next couple of years, especially since I personally believe that Apple will continue to sell the base $999 M1 MacBook Air even after the redesigned M2 model comes out next year. So because of that, Apple knew that they would need more M1 chips than probably any other chip in Apple's history, which allowed them to order massive amounts of that M1 chip from the get-go from their manufacturer TSMC, basically giving them a huge bulk order discount. And on top of that, Apple is also saving a lot of money by using the same M1 chip for so many different products compared to having to design various sizes and versions of chips like Intel has been doing for many years, like their i3, i5, i7, i9, and many Xeon chips, making it considerably more expensive to design and manufacture all of them. But Apple only had to design a single chip, which ended up saving cash in various different areas like labor for research, labor for designing the chip, labor for setting up the manufacturing of everything from the silicon die to the chip packaging process, and much more. So in reality, Apple knew how much cash they would save by going this single M1 chip route. So much cash that Apple probably could have reduced the price of each of these Macs and still made more profit than they made with the previous Intel Macs. And that's actually what they did with the M1 Mac Mini, lowering the base price by $100 and giving customers a much more powerful Mac, especially in terms of the graphics performance. So what's great for Apple is that they no longer have to pay Intel for their overpriced chips, which is awesome. But what people don't realize is that the higher end M1X and future Macs will save Apple even more money. Not only will they not have to pay Intel for the CPUs, but Apple will no longer have to pay AMD for their dedicated graphics chips, like in the 16-inch MacBook Pro, the 27-inch iMac, and especially the Mac Pro. So keep that in mind while I get into the main topic of how Apple is gonna leverage chiplet technology with the M1X chip for their higher end Macs, so let's get right into it. First off, if you don't know what chiplet technology is, TechQuickie explained it very well in this video, but let me just give you a quick rundown. Making much more powerful chips requires more cores, which increases the physical die size of the chip that needs to be cut out of a silicon wafer. But the problem with that is that the manufacturing process isn't perfect. And sometimes a couple of small sections of the die could be defective, rendering the entire die worthless, leading to lost yields compared to manufacturing smaller, less powerful chips which have very high yields. So instead of making gargantuan chips and risking the chance of losing them to defects, AMD started using chiplet technology, which essentially involved making a bunch of small chips and combining them together to make a huge chip package, like in this example, where using chiplets would only cost 59% of the cost compared to building one massive chip. This obviously gave AMD a huge advantage compared to Intel, the company that still uses the traditional single huge chip process, and it's also a huge part of the reason why AMD is doing so well today. But just a couple of months ago at Computex 2021, AMD took it to the next level by showing off their new 3D chiplet technology, where they can stack dedicated SRAM directly on top of their CPU cores to greatly improve performance. But here's the most important part of that AMD announcement.
We've worked closely over the last few years with TSMC on their 3D fabric technology to combine chiplet packaging with die stacking to create a 3D chiplet architecture for future high-performance computing products.
Now, what you just heard is that the 3D fabric technology actually belongs to TSMC, the same company that manufactures all of Apple's chips. And since we already know that Apple is by far TSMC's most important customer, it makes sense for TSMC to offer this new 3D fabric technology to Apple, and it makes sense for Apple to utilize it because it truly is groundbreaking. But now let's get into how I know Apple is going to be utilizing it and why it's going to make Apple dominate the market for the next couple of years. A couple of months back, Mark Gurman, who is by far the most reliable Apple leaker, reported that Apple is getting new high-end Macs ready, including the MacBook Pros, the Mac Mini, the larger iMac, and the Mac Pro. But within that report, he gave us some very interesting details in terms of the chips that Apple will be using for the MacBook Pros. There will be two chips, codenamed Jade C Chop and Jade C Die, both with 8 high-performance cores, 2 efficiency cores, and either 16 or 32 graphics cores, so the only difference between the two is the graphics. But here's what I only just now realized. Jade C Die stands for the full die with 32 GPU cores, and Jade C Chop means that Apple will literally be chopping off 16 of the graphics cores from the full-size chip to make a weaker chip, which will probably be going into the base model 16-inch MacBook Pro as well as the 14-inch model. This will essentially allow Apple to mass manufacture a single M1X chip to save a ton of cash, while at the same time creating the illusion of a variety of chip options, which will give Apple the chance to upsell chip upgrades with better performance. So for example, the base 14-inch MacBook Pro could get a binned 12-core GPU version of the Jade C Chop, with Apple disabling up to 4 potentially defective GPU cores, which is something Apple is already doing with the base M1 MacBook Air's 7-core GPU to give them better chip yields. Now, on top of the base 14-inch model, Apple could allow you to upgrade to the 16-core Jade C Chop chip for maybe $150 more, or maybe even spend $300 more to upgrade to a binned 24 or 28 core version of the full-size Jade C Die chip. And then for the 16-inch MacBook Pro, you'll get the 16-core Jade C Chop at the base price, with the option of upgrading to the binned 24 or 28 core Jade C Die, and then of course, the ultimate 32-core version, which will only be available on the 16-inch MacBook Pro. This will basically give Apple the ultimate variety of chip options, which will make it easier for Apple to upsell you on better performing chips. And not only that, but Apple is going to be saving immense amounts of cash by, first of all, mass producing just one M1X chip, and then of course, they'll be utilizing chip binning, so they can sell the chips that have defective cores instead of just tossing them out and losing money. But now, here's where the new chiplet 3D fabric technology comes in. Mark Gurman reported that the new chips will include up to 64 gigabytes of memory, which means that Apple will be offering the new chips with either 16 gigs, 32 gigs, or 64 gigs, and the way they can do this is by using TSMC's 3D stacking tech to place the different varieties of RAM on top of the actual cores to save space and make it easier to manufacture. And this is going to be very important for the next step in Apple's master plan. Mark Gurman reported that Apple is redesigning the Mac Pro and giving it new Apple Silicon chip options, either with 20 or 40 computing cores made up of either 16 or 32 high-performance cores, either 4 or 8 high-efficiency cores, and either 64 or 128 graphics cores. Now you might be wondering why the heck the desktop Mac Pro needs 8 efficiency cores, and the answer is that it really doesn't. But it's gonna save Apple a ton of cash, and here's how. Gurman says that these chips are codenamed Jade 2C die and Jade 4C die, which literally means that Apple will be using chiplet technology to combine either 2 or 4 of the regular M1X Jade C die chips together to make a huge chip package for the Mac Pro. So for the high-end Jade 4C die, simply take the 10-core M1X and multiply it by 4 to give you that 40-core Mac Pro CPU chip. And then take the M1X's 32-core GPU and multiply it by 4 to give you the full 128 cores. And that's why it makes so much sense for the Mac Pro's highest-end Jade 4C die chip to have 8 efficiency cores, since it's literally going to combine 4 of the regular M1X chips together, which each contain 2 efficiency cores. But here's the absolutely genius part about all of this. Apple will essentially be mass producing insane amounts of that same exact M1X Jade C die chip to cover a wide variety of Macs, like the lower end 14-inch MacBook Pro, all the way up to a high-end 40-core Mac Pro. And they could even throw in the 20-core Jade 2C die into other products like a new Apple Silicon iMac Pro or a very high-end Mac Mini if they wanted to. And they're all gonna be using a single M1X chip design, saving them unspeakable amounts of cash. This level of mass manufacturing is gonna allow Apple to subsidize their Macs and keep the prices impressively low for how much power these new chips pack, making it very difficult for other PC makers like Qualcomm to compete, since they won't be able to mass manufacture chips like Apple will be able to do. And that is how Apple is going to be dominating the PC market for the next couple of years, especially in the laptop market. The only question remaining is whether these chips will be called the M1X or the M2X, especially since the Apple Silicon Mac Pro isn't expected to come until late in 2022. But either way, Apple's gonna be killing it with this chiplet technology. If you totally disagree with my thoughts on this, then go ahead and comment your thoughts down below. But if you enjoyed this video, click that circle above to subscribe for more videos like this one, and definitely check out one of those two right over there. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.